that's Lemonade by Geoff Bartley, played on this National Delphi resonator, which once belonged to Geoff and has now been passed on to me. You can hear the original version of Lemonade on Geoff's album Hear That Wind Howl, which might be a little bit harder to find. I'm not sure that is on streaming services at the moment, but what is his collection Uncle Wiggily's Bicycle Ride. It's full of many of the instrumentals that Geoff recorded throughout the years. It has some fantastic music and guitar playing on it. I definitely recommend checking out the whole thing. And Geoff has been a huge influence on my music life and my guitar playing. This was the first piece of his I ever learned. In the liner notes to the CD of Hear That Wind Howl, he had a tab for this song, and I remember discovering that and sitting down and just locking myself in my room until I could play it. And it's brought me a lot of pleasure playing this one over the years. So I hope it does for you too. It's definitely worth putting in the time to learn it, and I'm going to walk you through all of the steps here. So the first thing is to get into open G tuning, and you can do that with your tuner. You can see the tuning on the tab that I have in the description of the video, which you can download from my website. But we'll go through it here together because I think it's good to learn to do it by ear rather than to always rely on an electronic tuner. So I'm in standard tuning right now. If I was going to tune into open G, how I would do it would be like this. I would start by playing my fourth string, my D, and then I would drop my sixth string down to a D. So it's pretty much like going into drop D tuning at this point. It doesn't have to be perfect at first because we might go back and make some little adjustments as we go. Just get it as close as you can. And then take your first string, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to take this down to a D as well. So now I use all three of those notes. Listen to them together. So now we're in what's called double drop D. Both of those strings were loosened. Alright, and the last step is we're going to take our A string and we're going to drop that down to a G. So think of this as very similar to drop D, except it's kind of drop G instead. So I'm going to use my G string now as my reference point. That's how I tune to open G tuning, and I recommend you do the same thing. Learn to do it by ear like that. That way you don't have to rely on an electronic tuner, and eventually the more you do that, it will get really easy to travel in and out of the different tunings, whether it's open G or other open tunings, and then back to standard tuning. Just gives you more guitar self-reliance to be able to do that. One thing you'll notice is sometimes, and this depends on the guitar, but sometimes it might take a little bit for the guitar to settle into the tuning, so you might have to continue to make some little micro adjustments as you go. All right, so let's get into the music for Lemonade. We'll start going through the tab together. And as I often do, the first thing I'm going to point out as we start measure one is the bass line. So the bass line for measure one is just alternating your thumb from strings 5 to 4. So that's the bass line there. Always good to start with that. And then the melody, I should mention, as I often do in these videos, that my thumb is going to play strings 6, 5, and 4, and my index string 3, my middle string 2, my ring string 1. So let's take a little listen to what the melody does. One more note there. That's the melody to the first measure. Okay, now if I combine that with what my thumb is doing, my thumb plays the first beat, the melody rests on beat 1, it comes in on the and of 1. So measure 1, nice and slow, it sounds something like this. As for the fingerings on this first part, you're either going to be in second position, which means the index finger stationed over the second fret, and then the middle the third, the ring the fourth, the pinky the fifth, or first position, just taking all those fingers back one fret to 1, 2, 3, and 4. I recommend trying to use all 4 of the fingers on the fretting hand. Try to avoid going easy on yourself at first and maybe using the fingers that feel stronger to you at the moment. Instead, try to get all 4 fingers working together, and then in the long run, as you get more comfortable with the piece and your fingers get a little bit stronger, the music will flow in a much more pleasing way, and it will just be more efficient if you're using all 4 fingers. Measure 2, we're going now to a D7 chord, and that means our thumb is going to change a little bit what it's doing in the bass part. It's going to be playing now 6, 4, 6, 4. It's going to do that for 2 measures. Now that we've looked at the bass line in measures 2 and 3, let's take a look at the melody in measure 2. We're going to start by fretting the second fret of the third string with our middle finger, and we're going to play this little ascending run of notes. That last note is a half note, the others are eighth notes. So if we start that melody there, adding in the bass line, my thumb is going to be on string 6, and I'm going to pinch to begin. And then I have just 2 solo bass notes there at the end. So it'll sound like that. Make sure not to rush those last 2 bass notes. Even though the melody's not doing anything there, you're just sustaining that final note. Try to have those 2 bass notes have a nice even flow to all the others. So if you've watched some of my other videos, I often recommend finding that pace with your thumb and then trying to add and subtract the melody. That will just help you to be able to hear the bass line really clearly, to be able to hear the rhythm of it really clearly, and the music of it really clearly. Sometimes once we start to play the melody, it can be easy to lose the bass line, and that's where things can start to get a little bit rhythmically out of sync. We might rush those bass notes when there's nothing happening in the melody, but that will help keep you really accountable to playing it with good rhythm and hearing things in a good way. Okay, as you get to measure 3, same thing here in measure 3 as in measure 1. The bass line is going to start the measure. We're just going to play that single bass note. And then our pinky is going to be playing the 4th fret of string 1, and we're going to do a little descending run in the melody. Okay, as I add the bass line into that, those are all just a steady stream of eighth notes. So I play my first bass note, and then the melody is going to begin on the and of 1. All right, let's hear measures 2 and 3 now. All right, as I come into measure 4, I'm coming back to a G chord. So that means I'm alternating between strings 5 and 4 again in my bass part. We're going to play a little ascending, kind of walking run of thirds here. So I'm going to begin my melody fingers here, index and middle are playing the 2nd and 3rd string open, and then I'm going to fret the 2nd and 1st fret of those strings, and I'm going to just walk in half steps until I get to the 4th and 3rd fret. If I add my bass part in there, I start with a big pinch of 3 fingers, and then just like in measure 2, you could hear there the last 2 beats are just the thumb playing your bass line. All right, now we have a pretty nice theme to listen to these first 4 measures. Let's hear that one more time, a little bit slower. we come into measure 5, we're still on that G chord, so the bass line is going to remain the same as it did in the past measure, and this is really similar to measure 1. Everything's the same, actually, except for the final note, which is going to be the 2nd fret of the G string rather than the open G string as it was in measure 1. So here's measure 5. So there's that little change there at the end, because we're now heading into a C chord for the first time in the song. And what we can do is we go to that C chord, move that middle finger up to the 4th string, 2nd fret. Our bass line here is going to be 5, 4, 5, 4, like it was on the G chord, but we have that fretted note, so it's changing the harmony a little bit. The melody that's going to go on top of that bass line is going to be the open G string, followed by the 1st fret of the 2nd string, open 1st string, 2nd fret of the 1st string. Now you notice to fret those notes, I'm operating out of a different sort of fingering here, because really what we're working with when we're in open G, this would be our C chord shape here. So our C chord shape is the 2nd fret of the D string, the 1st fret of the 2nd string. That's really kind of familiar, right? That's what we would have in standard tuning, except there's a couple changes. This string's no longer an A. In fact, it's a G, which is a chord tone of a C chord. So we can just play the 5th string open. That allows the ring finger to come down and fret the 2nd fret of the 1st string, which is now tuned down to a D. So by fretting that 2nd fret, it's kind of like we're going back into standard tuning in a way, because it's giving us an E note. That's the note that changed down to a D. Now it's back to an E. And you can hear that really pretty C chord there. So in this measure, what's happening is we're starting with just that middle finger on its bass note. Then we're adding that 1st fret note with the index. Then we pinch the bass note on the open 1st string. Then we play that 2nd fret of the 1st string. So you can see as I do that nice and slow, I'm kind of building into that C chord shape. So halfway through the measure, we have the whole chord on there. But then, as the measure ends, I'm going to go back to my bass. So that's the 3rd beat there. I'm back on the 5th string. Then I'm going to play the open 3rd string on the and of that 3rd beat, 3 and. My ring finger moves up now. It's going to play the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. So beat 4, I'm pinching strings 4 and 3 while I'm fretting those 2 2nd fret notes on those strings. And then the last note is the open 2nd string. So the second half of measure 6 would be, one more time. Okay, let's hear that whole measure now, measure 6, the C chord measure. One more time, really slow. All right, measure 7, we're coming back into a D7 chord. So our bass line is going back to an alternating bass, string 6, 4, 6, 4. And my melody here is going to be all 8th notes the whole measure, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. It's going to sound like this. As I play that, you notice I start in 1st position, and then I use this open 1st string note to just give me a little moment to then shift up into 2nd position to get those last 3 fretted notes. As I add the melody and bass together, so my first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to pinch string 6 and 2, fretting the 1st fret of that 2nd string. One more time, really slow. Okay, measure 8 is the only measure where the bass pattern gets a little bit irregular, in the sense that we're not going to be doing quarter notes anymore. There is 1 quarter note in there, but the other 2 are dotted quarter notes, which means they get 1.5 beats. So we just landed our pinky on the 5th fret of the 1st string, and we can just keep it there because we're going to need it again in a moment. Your ring finger can be getting ready to go to the 5th fret of the 3rd string, because the first thing you're going to do in this measure once you have those notes fretted, is you're going to play the 5th string open, and then the 3rd and the 1st string, the strings you're fretting there. So you can just think of that as a little roll of your picking fingers. Okay, now your middle finger is going to fret the 4th fret of the 3rd string as the ring finger comes off, so we can get that note. We're going to do the same thing there. So now we have that. Now my index finger is free, and what that's going to do to finish off the A section here is it's going to fret the 4th fret of the 5th string, and I'm going to pinch that with the open 3rd string. So here's measure 8. Let's do a nice slow playthrough of the A section. Heading into the B section, we'll encounter a little bit more challenge in this part because there's some measures where we're going to have to play off of a bar finger. We're going to start off on a C chord in the first measure of the B section, and being that we're in open tuning and our open strings are giving us a G chord, a really user-friendly aspect of open tunings is our 1 chord, is that set of open strings that I just played there. Our 4 chord would be if we barred fret 5. So that gives me a C chord. If I barred fret 7, that would give me the 5 chord, the D chord. So a couple easy ways whenever you're in any sort of open tuning to get the 1, the 4, and the 5 chord, in this case G, C, and D. And we're going to start barring the 5th fret. You don't have to bar the whole thing though, you just have to bar strings 5 through 1. So even though it's just a 1 string difference, it can take a little bit of stress off of your fretting hand as you bar that 5th fret. Make sure when you're trying to play these barred passages, a couple things that will make it a lot easier. The first is to make sure that your thumb gets really low on the back of the neck. You can't see my thumb hanging over the top of the neck. It's almost below the halfway point, and that allows, at least for my size hand, it allows my finger to get nice and straight. Anytime your thumb starts to come upward, so now you can see it coming up over the neck, and look what happened to the angle of my finger. It slanted drastically to the side. So the lower my thumb is, the straighter I can get my index finger. The other thing to note is it looks like my index finger is covering the 5th fret completely. It's actually not. It's just very snug up against that 5th fret. But that's going to be the place where it's going to be easiest to fret those notes and get them nice and clear. So make sure that you get really close to the fret wire when you're playing these barred passages. Again, if you're looking from this other vantage point, it almost looks like my finger is on top of the fret. The bass line in this measure, as I have that bar down now on the 5th fret, is going to be 5, 4, 5, 4. And as we begin to add the melody in, the first thing we do is we pinch 5 and 1. So those are both barred notes. Then the middle finger is going to fret the 6th fret of the 2nd string. After that, on beat 2, my thumb alternates down to the 4th string in the bass, and I'm going to pinch that with the 2nd string, both barred notes again. Okay, now my ring finger is going to play the 7th fret of the 3rd string. That's just a solo melody note on the and of 2. As I get to the 3rd beat now, I'm going to be pinching again the 5th fret notes, this time on 5 and 3, so that's off the bar again. Okay, now I'm going to go back to that 7th fret note on the 7th fret of the 3rd string. That's the and of 3. Okay, now I'm going to pinch 4 and 2 again, and the final note is the 5th fret of the 3rd string. Let's hear that all come together now, the first measure of the B section. One more time, a little bit slower. Okay, you might have noticed that second time through, that was hard to play because I'm sitting here and I'm gripping that bar finger down for an extended period of time. That's something worth thinking about when you're first learning a passage like this in a song. You're going to be sitting there potentially holding that bar finger down for a really long time as you work this passage out. And that can be exhausting. It's definitely the hardest point of playing something like that. It actually makes it seem like it's a lot worse than it is, because the truth is, once you do get comfortable with playing it, you go through that measure in a few seconds and you're immediately into another measure that uses a lot more open strings. So that brings immediate relief. The bar finger comes off and it gets a short moment to regroup a little bit and let go of that strain, which is really helpful when you're playing a piece. But when you're first learning it again, you're going to be sitting there for extended periods of time, and that's where it can get really exhausting. So pay attention to your hand. Don't stress it too much. Give yourself a lot of breaks, shake out the tension, maybe go on to some different measures and come back to this one. After you spend a sustained amount of effort over a number of practice sessions, it will start to get a lot easier. The second measure of the B section, which is measure 10 overall, this is back to a G chord, alternating bass on strings 5 and 4. A lot more open strings on this measure, so as I said a moment ago, it's going to give you some relief from the challenge of the previous measure. So we're going to start with a pinch of 5 and 3, fret the second fret of G on the and of that beat, some open strings after that, back to a similar fingering from what we used in the A section whenever we were up there on the 5th and 4th fret using the pinky and the ring finger. The third measure of the B section, measure 11 overall, that's bringing us to a D7 chord, and we're going to take our bar finger that we had down on the 5th fret for the C chord theme a couple measures ago. We're going to move that up to the 7th fret to play this D7 theme, and you can see I have the same strings barred as before, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, although if you want, in this measure, all you really need is 4, 3, 2, and 1. So you can decide for yourself how many strings you want to bar. I bar 5 again, and I think I've just always done that because it's keeping things consistent with that previous chord that we did. So experiment with that. You might find that just barring 4 strings is easier for you. I find it easier to just keep things the same as a little bit earlier. Now the melody here, it pretty much does the exact same thing that we did over here. We're just moving it up a whole step. The bass line changes a little bit. Let's just look at the first half of this measure. So the bass line is alternating 6 to 4, but you can hear that second bass note is of a much higher pitch since it's coming off the bar finger. Now the melody is going to be the 7th fret of the 1st string. That gets pinched with that first bass note. Then my middle finger plays the 8th fret of the 2nd string. And then I'm going to pinch strings 4 and 2. Those are both barred notes. And then my ring finger is going to play the 9th fret of the 3rd string. This time it's just a short time, half the measure, up there on that barred finger. In the second half of the measure, we come back to the open strings in the bass. So same strings for the picking hand, but now they've both opened up as the bar finger has come off. And our melody is going to sound like that, starting on that open 1st string. As I add the bass into that second half, it'll sound like that. Okay, let's hear that whole measure together. One more time, really slow. The fourth measure of the B section, measure 12 overall, takes us back to a G chord, and the bass line changes a little bit. This time we're going to be going 5, 4, 5, 5 again, but as we do, we're going to fret the 4th fret of that 5th string. That 4th fret note is just a nice little voice lead back into the bar on the 5th fret as we go into the measure after this. The melody here is a fun little wacky melody with a sense of humor. Sounds like that. as I add the bass and the melody together, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pinch 5 and 3, grab that second fret note. You can see in the music, as we go to beat 2, we're going to slide up to the 4th fret. That 2 is just a tiny little 2 that leads us into that, because that's a grace note. We're not really playing any time value on that second fret note. We're just using it as a starting point to slide into the 4th fret. And with my picking hand there, I'm pinching 4 and 3. Then my index finger is free to grab the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. So there's the first half of that measure. Then I'm going to fret the 5th fret of the 1st string with my pinky. I'm going to pinch strings 5 and 1, play the 4th fret of that 1st string on the and of 3 there. And for the 4th beat, I'm going to fret the 3rd fret of the 1st string with my index, and here's that bass note that we looked at a moment ago, the 4th fret of the 5th string. So picking wise there, it's strings 5 and 1 as a pinch. And that's how that measure should sound. As we come into the next measure, it's a repetition of what we did at the start of the B section. We're back on that bar of 5. The next measure is a really cool one. We're going to fret the 9th fret of the 1st string with our pinky. We're going to play a pinch there of 5 and 1 with the picking hand. The bass line of this measure, we're back to a 5-4, 5-4, like we've done a lot throughout the song. Hey, Melba. Little correction there, actually. The bass line of this measure, it's back to what we had done a couple measures ago, where we're going to go 5, 4, 5, 5 as we fret that 4th fret of the 5th string again. So same thing that we did in measure 4 of the B section, or measure 12 overall. So as we add the melody into this part, we're going to start with the pinky on the 9th fret. Then we're going to go to the 5th fret. Both of those notes are on string 1, open string 1, open string 2, open string 3, open string 4, and then here's my bass note, and then the final note is my thumb. Again, I use the thumb twice in a row there. You could do thumb index if you want to get even more efficient with the picking hand, but I think using the thumb is fine twice there. So the interesting thing in this measure is the melody kind of collides with the bass. Maybe even right here you could say, I use my index for that. Okay, as the bass comes into it, it would sound like that. So you can decide for yourself what you want to do picking wise. There's maybe a couple tiny decisions in there that you might want to experiment with. Like I said, I do right here, I do thumb and index on that 3rd beat, then my index I just bring it up to grab that open D note, whereas maybe a lot of other times we might use the thumb on that string. But I think I'm doing that just to save my thumb for that 4th fret, and then I use it again there, although I mentioned a moment ago you could maybe go like that, thumb index. I think any of that works fine. As I said, you can kind of experiment for yourself in that measure and decide. Really fun measure to play though. Okay, as you get to the next measure, the 7th measure of the B section, this is actually a repetition of the 3rd measure of the B section. So we're once again barring 7. We're going to play half the measure up there off the bar, and half the measure coming down to the first 2 frets in the melody and opening up that bass line. Nothing new there. Now we're at the first ending of the B section, and it's going to begin with a few quarter notes. We're going to play a pinch of 5 and 3. Then we're going to play the 1st fret of the 4th and the 2nd string. I'm playing a bar there on strings 4, 3, 2, and 1, but we just need the 1st fret of strings 4 and 2, so whatever you have to do to get those notes. I guess if you don't want a bar, you could just grab that with 2 fingers, but since we've already been doing a bunch of barring, I think it's just as easy here to to grab a partial bar to get those notes, kind of implying a C minor chord. Then come off those notes and play the same 2 strings open. Then we're going to play on the and of 3, the open 3rd string, the 2nd fret of that string on the 4th beat, and then the open 4th string on the and of 4. So here's the first ending of the B section, and I'm going to play that into the first measure of the A section, where we would be heading into the repetition of the whole piece. So it should sound like that as you turn it around back into the A part. Now you're going to play through the entire A section, entire B section again. Of course, you'll skip the first ending this time, and you will come to the second ending, which is the end of the piece. So if you want, sometimes what I do is I just play ending 1 a number of times, and then when I'm ready to end the piece, I'll go to ending 2. And ending 2 starts with the first 3 beats the same as ending 1. But we take the 8th notes out of the equation. We add a 4th quarter note to that measure. It's just a single melody note, the 5th fret of the 1st string. Okay, then we're going to play a measure that we've played a couple times already in the B section. It's the measure that is measure 3 and measure 7 of the B section. And then we're into the final measure here. We're going to pinch 5 and 3 again, play the open 1st string, and then we're going to fret the 5th fret of the 1st string, and we're going to play strings 3, 2, and 1. So that final measure. And of course you want ending 2 to bring the piece in for a nice landing. So we might play it something like this. I'm going to play from measure 7 of the B section just to give us a little runway into that second ending. So something like that might work nice. Although there's a lot of different ways you can end a piece, so experiment with it, add your own personal touch there. And there it is, Lemonade by Geoff Bartley. I've played the song for a long time now, and I still love playing it. It brings me a lot of joy whenever I do. Very important song to me, and it really helped push me forward as a fingerstyle guitarist. So if you're at the point where you've been maybe doing a lot of different pattern-based songs, this is a great step forward because it really forces you to play a more elaborate melody along with all those bass notes and all the little twists and turns throughout this piece. But for all the challenges you might encounter when you're first working on it, it's really rewarding. And as I said, I've played it for years now, and I'm still glad to play it every time I do. So thanks to Geoff for writing this awesome song among so many others, and for including that tab in his liner notes of Hear That Wind Howl, which was probably essential to me when I first learned this one. I don't think I had the tools to figure it out by ear at that point, but because I've learned this one and many other things from Geoff over the years, now I can sit down and I can actually listen to this sort of guitar playing and figure it out by ear if I don't have a tab for song. So again, this one was really helpful to me in my development, and I hope it will be to you too. Let me know if you have any questions about it, and I will be back soon with another song for you.